Go through the notes at your own pace. What you want to make sure you have is your notebook open to the notes sheet like this, already glued in with a pencil or pen to write with. So the evolution of land plants. We are talking about land plants because they are those primary producers. Well, plants in general are. And so as the primary producers, they appear first in the fossil record, both as first major life and also first major land life, because everything relies on them. And by everything, I mean all of the consumers and animals. So that's why we're talking about them, and that's why they appear first. So they've evolved from the cyanobacteria, or that first photosynthesizing organism that produced all that oxygen around 2.2 billion years ago. And they were also the first organisms to leave water and colonize land, because if they couldn't do it, animals needed something to eat. So this was, if we kind of go back, the end of the Precambrian eon, which is, we keep kind of talking about this time period with the great oxygenation event as well, because it was so important for biotic and abiotic aspects. So cyanobacteria increase the oxygen amount in the atmosphere. And they do this for many billions of years because then they would kill themselves, right? So they're living, they produce all that oxygen, and then it gets to a poisonous, toxic level, and then their population goes back down. Now, eventually, though, they did evolve other mechanisms to not have themselves die from too much oxygen, and the ozone formed. And if we look at this picture here, the ozone is really, and this is showing us a couple different parts of the ozone. Think of it as a protective cloud around the Earth. What's it protecting us from? Harmful sun rays. And so it's shielding and protecting us. And before this ozone layer, land plants and land animals could not really exist, because what would happen is the sun's rays would come down and would mutate or change the DNA of all these living things and ultimately kill them. This still happens today, just at a much lower rate, and this is what causes skin cancer, which is why it's important to wear sunscreen. But anyways, so before this ozone layer was there, a lot of land plants and animals could not be, or plants and animals couldn't be outside of the water. And so they needed to be in the water to be protected. But once the ozone layer was there, they could start to come out on the land. So coming out on the land, there are a few, here we go, different problems that the plants ran into. And these are the three problems. So the first one is they would dry out, and that's called desiccation. So in the ocean, this wasn't really a big issue because of the water everywhere. Number two, they needed support. So without water around them to kind of help hold them up and support them, plants needed, in order for them to grow big and tall, they needed some support structure. Lastly, the effects of gravity, and this kind of goes with support. If they don't have support, they're just going to fall down due to the effects of gravity, and that they're not going to get as much sunlight, and they are going to then decompose into the soil. So how did plants do this? What did they do? Well, these are the different solutions in terms of their adaptations. Now, these are not in order to perfectly match the problems. So you need to think about where these are going to go. So one is they had vascular tissue. Now include this term, but then include a definition. This is essentially what they used to transport food and water. This is their veins and arteries. It did provide some support, but it was a lot more about transporting and storing food and water. Cellulose, this was all about strength and support to allow their cells to be stronger with strong cell walls. Roots allowed plants to collect more water and also allowed them some support so that they could anchor into the water. Leaves were obviously very efficient at gathering light. This was something helpful for them to make more food for photosynthesis so they could get bigger. And then lastly, seeds, and specifically protected seeds, allowed plants to protect their offspring because a seed is just a baby plant. So it allowed plants to protect their offspring without needing water exactly nearby. So you now have a big chart there that it has all these blue boxes, and those blue boxes correspond with the blanks in this diagram. So I'm going to briefly go through it. You might need to pause this point to get everything down. What I want you to do first is see the two categories, the yellow, non-vascular, the green, vascular. Remember up here, this vocab word of vascular represented the transport mechanisms. So this was like the veins and arteries. So non-vascular have no way to transport water and food. So imagine for your body if all of your veins and arteries disappeared. That means you would eat something or drink something with your mouth and that food and water would stay in your head forever. Okay, now luckily that doesn't happen because we have transport systems all over our body. But what that meant for these plants is that let's say some water fell right here, this plant, that water would only go right around it. That means if no water fell all over here in this, that part of the plant would die. Non-vascular plants are things like mosses or liverworts, which grow a lot on rocks and in very wet and moist places because they need a lot of water. So these are the older plants that are the first ones to be coming out of the water. They don't have that many adaptations yet, which is why if we look down in the time, we've got about 2.2 billion years ago is when we had that first ancestral green algae. And then for a long time, billions of years, plants just stayed in this non-vascular region. Then eventually, around 420 million years ago, so include that date there with the first vascular plants. So now we can transport. Now plants can get big. They start having all sorts of cool seeds and eventually flowers and things like that. So ferns are before plants evolved seeds, but when they still had transport tissues of the vascular tissues. So ferns is that first one. Then we start getting more complex as we get the first seeded plants. We have conifers like white bark pine or lodgepole pine or subalpine fir. And then the most complex plants evolved after, and these are our plants with flowers. So like sagebrush has flowers, or arrowleaf balsam root. Or you might think that all trees are conifers, but like aspens have flower parts. So those more complex plants came about at the very end. All right, so this link is going to take you to a video here. I am going to let the video play. Oh, no, I'm not. So I will put the video link in with the page. Sorry about that, you guys. So go watch that video link. That will start to help you think about ecosystem effects on plants for soil development, CO2, and climate. Now, question 3 asked about terrestrial animals and how they were impacted by plants. So similar things that you'll find in 1 and 2, the abiotic factors that you'll find in 1 and 2 that land plants did allowed terrestrial terrestrial animals to expand into a larger variety of available niches. Also, there's just more food, right? And so those favorable abiotic conditions and now more food allowed for animals to come out of the water and interact with the land plants as well. So last thing here is your summary. We are going to be peer editing these summaries, so other people will see your work, so make sure you feel good about it. Vocabulary words to include: vascular, you can include tissue or not, but that vascular word. Roots, seeds, flowers, oxygen, and impacts on animal life. Think about 3 to 5 sentences and focus on big ideas over time, not specific things, not defining vocabulary, and not listing things.